In my time as a fanboy, there has been only 3 occasions in which a teaser image of a movie was enough to make me want to see it without seeing a trailer or a second of footage from that movie. The first was an issue of Nintendo Power that had a teaser image of a live-action Leonardo from the first Ninja Turtles movie. The second was the teaser image of Alfred Molina as Dr. Octopus in Wizard magazine. And the last one was the reveal of Ron Perlman in his Hellboy makeup in Fangoria magazine. This is a look back at Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy. Greetings, Legion and casual viewers. Hellboy is my all-time favorite comic book character now, tomorrow, and forever. And in just a few short days, we will get the first ever Hellboy cinematic reboot. So I figured there is no better time to talk about the movies that started it all, that started the cinematic franchise. And of course, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy. But this wasn't a comic book franchise that was a massive hit and all the studios were fighting to adapt. The story of how it made it to the big screen is a lot more fascinating than the actual movies themselves, which are great, by the way. So I figured I'd take a moment and talk a little bit about that. But first, for the sake of the uninitiated, let me give you a little backstory on the titular character himself. Who the hell is Hellboy? Hellboy is a demon from hell that was summoned to Earth by Nazis and sorcery to help them win World War II. But before they could get to that stage of their plan, Hellboy was rescued by a team of American soldiers and then adopted by a professor of the paranormal called Trevor Broom, who then went on to become one of the founding members of a secret government group called the Bureau of Paranormal Research and Defense, to which Hellboy becomes a member. So this badass demon from hell, who was supposed to be our destroyer, ended up becoming our defender. But that's not even the most fascinating thing about this magnificent character. What I love about Hellboy is that the character is very grounded, he's very basic, and he's very blue-collar. To him, fighting monsters and saving the world is not this grand act. It's not this amazing epic adventure. It's just his job. It's just what he does between clocking in and clocking out from his work. He'd rather be at home eating a bowl of nachos, watching the game, than out in a cemetery somewhere in Ireland fighting a giant monster. That is what makes the comics great. The juxtaposition of the amazing and the paranormal with the everyday and the mundane. No matter how complicated the comic books get, Hellboy himself always breaks it down to the most basic of explanations so the reader can understand it, and it's always pretty damn hilarious. So those two elements working side by side makes this, as far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest comic book series of all time. There are 2 major eras in comics and movies that contribute to the creation of Hellboy and the eventual adaptation of the character into movies. In the comic book side of things, it was the creator-owned era. This was a time in the world of comics where creator-owned characters that didn't belong to Marvel or DC were being pushed to the forefront. Characters like Spawn, Madman, and Hellboy. Hellboy, of course, who was created by Mike Mignola. Now, on the movie side of things, this was the era in which fans were making movies for the fans. This is around the time when we saw Sam Raimi make Spider-Man and Robert Rodriguez make Sin City. This was the same for Guillermo del Toro. He wanted to make a Hellboy movie. This was his favorite comic book. But here's the thing. Guillermo del Toro, at the time, was not that big of a director. He had one studio movie under his belt, and that was Mimic, which was a fun creature feature, but it wasn't a massive blockbuster. So for him to immediately want to make this huge, epic, special effects packed blockbuster as his second, maybe third American-made studio movie was pretty damn ambitious, and studios wouldn't give him the time of day. He spent 7 years trying to get this movie made. And the crazy thing is that there were studios that were interested in adapting Hellboy into a movie. After all, comic book movies were just starting to gain momentum at the time. But they would always have all these conditions as to what they wanted the movie to be like that Guillermo del Toro would refuse to accept. One of the conditions was that Hellboy had to be just a regular human that turned into a demon when he got angry. No, that's the Hulk. No. Another one was that the character Hellboy comes from hell, but he still looks human. And again, no, Guillermo del Toro refused. But the one deal breaker that he met across the board was that while he always and forever wanted to cast Ron Perlman as Hellboy, and only Ron Perlman, the studios would refuse. Because even though Ron Perlman is highly respected in Hollywood and among actors and filmmakers, unfortunately he's not a marquee name. So to make such a huge special effects packed expensive movie with an actor who is not proven to be a marquee name, it was a huge risk. So understandably, other studios would turn him down left and right. Two major contributing factors led to a studio finally saying yes to Guillermo del Toro. The first one was Sony's success with Spider-Man. They were so happy with the way Spider-Man was performing that they were willing to take a gamble with another comic book property. Then at the same time, Guillermo del Toro's second big studio movie was Blade 2, one of the most successful comic book movies of all time. So to Sony, this was a no-brainer. They had massive success with their first ever comic book adaptation, and then the director who just made one of the most successful comic book movies of all time comes to them and says, hey, I want to adapt another comic into a movie. And thus, the first Hellboy movie went into production. But what is the first movie about? So the movie starts out exactly like the comics. It has the exact same backstory of the Nazis joining forces with Rasputin, the Mad Monk, and raising Hellboy out of hell. He's rescued by American soldiers, the professor adopts him, he becomes an agent for the BPRD. But other than that, it's not a direct adaptation of any one Hellboy comic. In fact, one of the most beautiful things about this movie is that it is a love letter to Hellboy's entire first run. It either references or plays tribute to almost everything that happens throughout all of Hellboy's first few comic books. The basic plot is simple. Rasputin is resurrected and he wants to manipulate Hellboy into using the right hand of doom, which is actually a key, to open a portal to another dimension and unleash the 7 gods of chaos on Earth, and the Earth will be destroyed, the prophecy will be fulfilled, end of story. So yeah, this is supposed to be a very simple plot, but one of the things that kills this movie and stops it from being a little bit more mainstream is that Rasputin's schemes to manipulate everyone to get this plan underway are ridiculously complex. And it takes you watching the movie a couple of times to really understand what he did and why he was doing it. And even then, some things don't make sense. One of the things that doesn't 100% make any sense is how he unleashed these hellhounds into the world to distract Hellboy. So yeah, I get it. Rasputin has to distract our hero in order to manipulate him into doing what he wants. But the crux of his plan is that he needs Hellboy alive so he can use his stone hand to open the portal, right? So purposely putting him in mortal danger seems pretty detrimental to his plans. Also, the way he motivates him into doing what he wants is he puts his love interest, Liz Sherman, in danger. But at the beginning of the movie, she's in a mental institution. He sneaks into her room and he could just easily kidnap her and go ahead and put her in danger and have Hellboy open the portal for him. But instead of doing that and saving himself a bunch of steps, what he does is he causes her to have an episode, lose control of her powers. Liz is pyrokinetic, for those of you who don't know. And she destroys the asylum, so their solution is to put her back with the BPRD, back with Hellboy. Again, his scheming is really elaborate. It's like he needs to manipulate him and be secretive, but he appears to Hellboy at one point and confronts him, then disappears. He leaves them a clue with the dead body of one of his minions. It's all really, really, really elaborate when all he really needed to do from the beginning is kidnap Liz, send Hellboy a ransom note. Hellboy goes to save her. He says, open the portal or I kill her. The end. But my God, it's just ridiculously elaborate. And the way the movie presents it, it doesn't 100% make sense. But as a Hellboy fan, all those ridiculous schemes lead to a lot of awesome scenes, so I can forgive it. Now, let's stop bitching about the plot and let's talk about the awesome characters in this movie. So famously, Guillermo del Toro refers to Blade 2 as the casting call for the Hellboy movies. And if you watch Blade 2 carefully, you'll notice that there is a shitload of actors from the Hellboy movies in it. The most obvious one being Hellboy himself, Ron Perlman, who plays Reinhardt in Blade 2. Carl Roden, that plays Rasputin, plays the vampire lawyer. Luke Goss, who played the villain Jared Novak, also played the villain in Hellboy 2, but more on that later. Santiago Segura gets cameos in all of them. And even Andrea Miltner, who had a minor role as a vampire nurse in Blade 2, pops up in the first Hellboy as a psychiatrist. Now, let's talk characters. Let's divide them up. First, villains and then the heroes. As much as I love the characters in this movie, the villains are a little generic. Rasputin is your standard cryptic wizard. Ilsa is your standard femme fatale, who apparently likes to hit a lot of stuff with hammers. I can relate. But the villain that really stands out is Cronin. He is an undead Nazi ninja who replaced his internal organs with clockwork. He is a wind-up assassin. This is one of the most fascinating and cool characters I've seen in any movie, and it came from the brain, the insane brain of Guillermo del Toro. Now, on the hero side of things, there were a few characters that they added to the movie that did not exist in the comics. The first and worst is John Myers. This character is pretty pointless, outside of the fact that he's supposed to be the audience surrogate, the character who's supposed to represent us and ask all the dumb questions to facilitate the exposition. Other than that, he is just there, occupying space. I hated that they threw him in there. It seemed like a waste of time. I felt that Liz Sherman could have filled this role, have her be the new agent joining the BPRD and being the audience surrogate. And with her being the love interest as well as another paranormal being, it would have felt more organic. And the other character that was created for the movie was Agent Manning, played by the great Jeffrey Tambor. Now, this character is just there to be a foil for Hellboy. He is annoying, he is a snooty bureaucrat, he's just there to remind everybody of the rules, and he's annoying as hell, but at the same time, the reason that he's there is because of one of the major differences between the film franchise and the comics. In the comics, Hellboy is a public figure. Everybody knows about him. You can even call the BPRD and ask them for help and have them send Hellboy over if you have monsters or zombies or ghosts or something. In the movie, the BPRD is a secret organization and Hellboy is classified. They have to be covert and keep him a secret at all times, and that was a little weird. It felt like they were catering to a general audience. Like if the government had a superpowered demon that fought monsters on their behalf, they would keep it a secret. But my feeling is that there's just so many monsters, so many paranormal creatures, I don't see how they would keep that a secret. But that's just me. Like I said, I think they did this so the whole concept of the paranormal living side by side with the real world would be a little bit easier to digest. I cannot emphasize enough that the cast of this movie is excellent. Of course, they got John Hurt to play Professor Broom. He's one of the greatest actors of all time, and he helped to validate this movie with his presence and his talent. And he's just one of those guys that has that amazing ability to make almost everything that he says sound epic.
In the absence of light, darkness prevails. There are things that go bump in the night, Agent Myers. Make no mistake about that. And we are the ones who bump back.
Obviously, Hellboy's not the only paranormal being that works for the BPRD. Two of those characters were thankfully adapted to this movie. The first one being the merman, Abe Sapien, and the other being the pyrokinetic Liz Sherman. Let's talk about Abe first. One of the few actors in this cast that I was completely unfamiliar with before I saw this movie was Doug Jones, who plays Hellboy's best friend, partner, and merman, Abe Sapien. This is by far one of the most fascinating characters from the comics, so they needed somebody very special to put on that makeup and play this otherworldly being who assisted Hellboy in his adventures. And when they picked this relatively unknown actor, I was slightly taken aback, but I love Guillermo del Toro so much that I trusted him, and immediately I was blown away by Doug Jones. It became very apparent why he was the one chosen, and very recently, he was once again typecasted as a merman in The Shape of Water, which won an Oscar. So, if you want further proof that he was the perfect person to cast as this character, I can't think of a better example. An interesting fact about Abe Sapien in this movie, while Doug Jones provided the physical performance, his voice was dubbed by David Hyde Pierce from Frasier. And apparently the studio did this as a cheap attempt to attach a more popular name to the movie, but ironically, David Hyde Pierce had so much respect for Doug Jones' performance as Abe Sapien that he refused to be credited for a dubbing. So you will not find his name anywhere on the credits of this film. Thankfully, this was the first and last time that Doug was ever dubbed as Abe Sapien. For the rest of his tenure as the character, we got to hear his voice, but more on that later. The other major player from the comics, of course, being Liz Sherman, played by Selma Blair. What's weird is that when I first started reading the comics, I always pictured Uma Thurman playing this character, but now I can't picture anybody else but Selma Blair. And another major change that they made from the comics to the movie, they made Liz Hellboy's romantic interest. In the comics, they're just friends, and Hellboy's girlfriend is Kate Kurrigan. We'll talk more about her next time. I will admit that this was a little weird. I see what Guillermo del Toro was going for, making the guy that's fireproof fall in love with the girl that has fire powers. But I will admit this one of those elements in the movie that's a bit distracting. All these huge things are happening, and Hellboy is just crushing on Liz like a schoolboy, and for the first 2 acts of the movie, she doesn't really seem to notice. She's horrifically indifferent. And I know the character's going through a lot, but it just felt like she either didn't care or was completely unaware of Hellboy's advances. It's not until the 3rd act that it becomes apparent that she does know that Hellboy likes her and that she cares about him in return, and then immediately at the end, they kiss. Which was a huge jump from her admitting or demonstrating that she had feelings for him to come here and give me some sugar, baby. And last but not least, our titular character, Hellboy, played by one of my all-time favorite actors, Ron Perlman. I think one of the elements that Ron understood perfectly about the character is that essentially Hellboy is a really big kid. He doesn't get to go out much, he doesn't get to interact with a grand variety of people, so he matures a lot slower than the rest of us. But of course, that's juxtaposed with the fact that he's this huge, super-powered, badass demon. That was one of those things that reminded me a lot of Buffy, where the horror, the action, and the comedy were almost always side by side. And the thing, the glue that held all those different genres and tones together was Ron.
Hey, Stinky! Kitchen's closed. What you having? 6 library guards raw, plus belts and boots? Man, You're gonna need some heavy fiber to move that out.
Alright, let's talk action. Now, a recurring trend in a lot of comic book movies is that the action sequences are essentially the same. One thing that I love about this movie is how all the action sequences in it are completely different. You know, you either have a chase scene, a straight up brawl, or something completely unexpected. One of the caveats from the studio for agreeing to let Guillermo del Toro make this movie with Ron Perlman as the lead actor was that he had to make it PG-13. And Hellboy is a very violent and bloody comic book, and the way that Guillermo del Toro circumvented that was he would throw in other items and liquids and debris that would basically mimic the movement of blood splatter. For example, in the moment where Hellboy starts beating up one of the Hellhounds with a payphone, instead of seeing blood shoot out of the Hellhound's head, you see all the coins shoot out of the payphone. So it's like that element that you know in your mind should be there is being filled in by Guillermo del Toro with a very simple substitute, and you absolutely don't notice. Another thing that I absolutely love is that none of the action sequences look choreographed or easy. Hellboy's just getting his ass kicked left and right, things are being destroyed. It's just pure freaking chaos. It never feels like anything went according to plan, which is most definitely one of the recurring themes from the comic. Things just go wrong, and sometimes for no reason. And of course, I cannot close this out without talking about the effects. Guillermo del Toro is well known for bringing in and presenting amazing, mind-blowing, otherworldly special effects in his movie, and this was no different. The practical effects, from the makeup on Hellboy and Abe to the animatronics for the Hellhounds, all those things look amazing, look beautiful, they look like museum pieces. Famously, the makeup for Hellboy was created by one of the masters, Rick Baker, and it shows, because not only is it accurate to the comic book, but it also gave Ron Perlman full expression. His performance did not get lost under pounds and pounds of makeup appliances. Every subtlety, every nuance about what Hellboy is feeling, you can 100% see it in every frame. Not to mention that the animatronics for the right hand of Doom and Hellboy's tail were always done so well. You never feel like there's somebody else off camera with a remote control controlling Hellboy's limbs. It 100% feels natural, like that hand and that tail are 100% a part of him.
Thank you.
My job.
On the flip side of that, this was around the time of Guillermo del Toro's career where he would experiment with sometimes using CG, sometimes side by side with the practical elements, and he himself jokes that there were many times during Blade 2 and the first Hellboy movie where that just didn't work. And a lot of the CG in this movie did not age well. Alright, let's close this out. In spite of its flaws with the overcomplicated plot and the somewhat mishandled romantic subplot, this is most definitely the definitive Hellboy movie. It is an awesome, awesome, awesome introduction to the character. If you've never seen Hellboy before, if you've never read a comic, this is the perfect way to learn about the character. Everything that you need to know about the franchise, all the basic stuff, is touched upon in this movie. And if you like what you see, I can guarantee you that the comic book is even better. Plus, as I said over and over again, this movie's just beautiful to look at. The composition, the shot design, the color palette, and the production design are superb. You could literally freeze frame any scene in this movie and it could be a poster. So check it out if you get the chance. You should especially see it before you see the Hellboy reboot. Tomorrow, my look back at Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy continues with Hellboy Animated.